Welcome to Hoop Bros Episode 2. Today, me and Joe will be discussing the Western Conference teams of the NBA. Make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you agree or disagree with anything.
First up today, we're going to start with the Dallas Mavericks. Now, they finished 43-32 last year, which was 7th in the West, and they lost to the Los Angeles Clippers in an exciting first-round matchup. A couple key additions that they had over the offseason was Josh Richardson and James Johnson. They did lose Seth Curry and DeLon Wright. Projected starting five right now is Luka, Tim Hardaway, Josh Richardson, Maxi Kleber, and Kristaps once he's healthy for sure. Dwight Powell will probably be in for Kristaps if he's not healthy. Overall, just like last year, this team's going to be amazing offensively again. And I don't see any reason why they couldn't do something similar again this year. Luka's only going to get better. He has a legitimate shot to be MVP. He might even just be the favorite for MVP this year. And I feel like everybody's just got to expect another big jump from him. He's only 21. He'll turn 22 this season. There's just no reason why he won't make another gigantic jump. And he's going to have to if they're going to want to be contending. This is a really stacked West, and although the Mavs are going to be good, there's just going to be a lot of good teams in the West throughout the season. So given that, I have the Mavs going 5th in the West this year.
I also think the Mavs are going to be very good again on the offensive side of the ball. Luka Doncic is just he'll end up being one of the greatest players we ever see. I really like the pickup of Josh Richardson and James Johnson. James Johnson might not play a lot, but he's a very, very good locker room presence, especially for Luka and the young guys. Josh Richardson is an immediate impact player, and the Mavs are going to be as high-powered as ever on offense. Luka personally is my favorite to win MVP to start the season. I think it's his time now. I think the torch has been passed to him. Giannis won back-to-back. I think it's Luka's time now. Given that the West is very stacked, I do see the Mavs making the playoffs, but I have them at the 4th seed. So right around the middle. But I think they'll be very good. Next, we're going to move on to the New Orleans Pelicans. Last year, they finished 30-42, which was 13th in the West. Key additions for the Pelicans, Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams. Key losses, though, they lost their best perimeter defender, one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA, Drew Holiday. They lost a pretty good veteran in Derek Favors, and they lost some shooting in Etuan Moore. Their projected starters are Lonzo Ball, JJ Redick, Brandon Ingram, Zion, and Steven Adams. Pretty similar to the lineup last year. Brandon Ingram, first All-Star appearance last year. Zion played the last 20-something games. Looks incredible. Lonzo Ball coming into his own. He may not be able to score very well, but he can pass, he can defend. And they have a pretty good big guy in Steven Adams. He's a little bit more physically imposing than Derek Favors. Not as much of a scorer as Favors is, but I don't think that's what the Pelicans really need. I think their roster up and down is pretty good. A lot of good young players, very similar to what they had last year. And since I don't see them getting incredibly better because Western Conference teams are just insanely stacked this year, I have the Pelicans going 11th in the West.
So yeah, this team, they'll be fun to watch, of course, with Zion. He'll be the big name, big story of the year. But also, I'm interested to see what Brandon Ingram does. He had a really good year last year, made some big improvements. Is he going to be able to sustain that? And is he going to be the guy, or is it going to be Zion? I think they have a pretty good duo, even a trio with Alonzo being a facilitator. And I think they have a couple pieces. They're just not the deepest team ever. And I think that's just going to hurt them in the West. There's just lots of good teams, lots of depth. And I think that's just going to be probably their biggest downfall, along with defense. There'll be some good defense, especially with the pickup of Steven Adams, give him more of an interior presence. But I also think that's going to hurt him. Me personally, I think Zion's going to work best when he's at the 5, and I just don't think he'll pair well with Steven Adams on the floor. And so I think it's just going to clog the floor, I think. And especially in that starting 5 especially, there's not many great shooters. JJ Redick, when he comes in, he'll help space the floor. But overall, I just think they're just going to be an okay team. They'll be fun to watch, of course, because Zion is just a freak. I have them going 11th in the West, personally. Moving on to the San Antonio Spurs, they finished 32-39 last year, and that was 11th in the West. They did miss the play-in game. So 2 key additions, and they were just both from the draft, was Trey Jones, but then also one of the steals of the draft, in our opinion, is Devin Vassell. Getting him where they did, just a tremendous 3-and-D guy. I think he's just going to be a great addition to the team, and he'll have a really good career. They did lose Bryn Forbes. Right now, their projected starting 5 is DeJounte Murray, Derek White, DeMar DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Jakob Poeltl. pretty good starting five. It's going to be a fairly efficient offense. They're going to be probably top 12 again. They shoot the ball really well, and even just with adding Vassell, it's just going to increase even more. I do like the pickup of Trey Jones too. I think that's going to be a player that's going to work really well with Pop. Kind of just a hard-nosed point guard, plays defense, is able to facilitate. Interested to see whether DeMar DeRozan and or LaMarcus Aldridge get moved. I think both of them they don't really fit this Spurs team, at least the timeline of it. I think Spurs are more into wanting like Murray and White, Jones, Vassell. I think the Spurs want them to be able to develop more, whereas DeRozan and Aldridge are more, they're not at the end of their careers, but they're in the later parts and probably want to be on teams that are contending more. Overall, like this team it's going to be good. They're going to win their games. They have a great coach, but there's just not, I think, enough talent to be like truly amazing. And so I'd have them finishing surprisingly 14th in a very competitive West. They could, I mean, there's a possibility they could sneak up 8, 9, 10, but I have them as the 14th seed right now.
Obviously, the Spurs aren't what they used to be, and that's okay. I mean, right now, they're a pretty mediocre team. They're kind of stuck in mediocrity, rebuild, especially in the West. Maybe if they're in the East, it'd be a different picture. But, I mean, DeMar DeRozan's good. LaMarcus Aldridge is good. Those are proven guys. DeJounte Murray, a young guy, is still improving. Derek White has shown flashes of being almost like a Jamal Murray type player. Jakob Poeltl, I think he's pretty good. Especially for Popovich, he loves foreign big guys. Tim Duncan. He loves foreign anybody. Tony Parker, Ginobili. But I think Devin Vassell is a huge pickup for them. I think he could be a premier 3-and-D player in the league. He could be a Robert Covington type. His ceiling could be a Spurs Kawhi eventually, but either way, he's going to be very good. Trey Jones, I could see him being a Spur like lifer, kind of like Patty Mills. But yeah, this year for the Spurs, it's just I wouldn't say a rebuilding year, but an opportunity to grow because obviously they're not a contender, but they're not the worst team in the West. I have them at number 12. Next, we're going to move on to the Memphis Grizzlies. Last year, they finished 34-39, and they finished 9th in the West. They lost to Portland in the play-in game because Damian Lillard went nuclear in the bubble, so I cannot blame them. Very young team, very exciting. Key additions, they added Mario Hezonja. Key losses, they lost Josh Jackson. That's a pretty fair trade-off. I wouldn't say they got better or worse with that. They're both similar type players that really didn't pan out. Their projected starting lineup is Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks, Kyle Anderson, Jaren Jackson, Jonas Valanciunas. Same as last year, pretty much. They have Brandon Clark, they have Justice Winslow, D'Anthony Melton, Tyus Jones, Xavier Tillman. They have a super young team, super exciting team. Ja Morant is must-see. Dillon Brooks is improving his offensive side. Good shooter. Kyle Anderson, do-it-all type guy. He's not really good at a particular thing. Jaren Jackson, he is a unicorn. He is very good. If he didn't get hurt, I feel like they actually would have made the playoffs, but they still almost made it without him. Brandon Clark, huge lob threat, super exciting. Very young team. And while they are young and exciting, they're young. So I don't see them making the playoffs this year, but I definitely could see it in the future. So this year, I have them at number 10 in the West, but don't count them out. They will be a very competitive team.
Grizzlies are just another team that just makes me so excited for this year. They're going to be a fun team to watch. Ja Morant, I mean, he was crazy last year. Like Mateo said, I think the loss of Jaren Jackson Jr. was huge for the Grizzlies and was what kept them out of the playoffs. I expect Jaren to have a huge year this year. I think he's my favorite right now, I think, for most improved player. I think having him back, if he can stay healthy the whole year, they're just going to be a dangerous team. And again, it's just the West is so loaded right now that it just hurts the Grizzlies because otherwise they'd be way higher than what they might end up being. Not that they don't have potential, and I think one day they will be like a top 1 or 2 seed in the West. But I still think that's 2-3 years out. I think the Xavier Tillman pick that'll be good once Jonas Valanciunas is kind of done. And I think they're a super young team. They're able to kind of go small. They're able to go big. Ja Morant's explosive. It's just such a loaded West. I do have the Grizzlies finishing 8th. And make the playoffs. They could give the 1 seed, whether it be Clippers, Lakers, maybe Nuggets. I think they could give them a run, but I do think that they end up making the playoffs in the 8th seed. Moving on to the very interesting Houston Rockets. Finished 44-28 last year, which was 4th in the West, and then they lost to the Lakers in the second round. They made the John Wall trade, where they picked up John Wall and lost Russell Westbrook. Rockets were also able to add Christian Wood and DeMarcus Cousins. They did lose Robert Covington, which is a sneaky big loss, and DeMar Carroll. Projected starting five right now, assuming everybody's healthy, is John Wall, James Harden, Eric Gordon, PJ Tucker, and Christian Wood. I personally think James Harden's just going to be traded. I think he wants to be out of there, and I think he will be. I think, though, like, even if they do keep Harden, I think they underperformed from last year. I am a big analytics guy, and so I think the small ball worked really well for them. I'm interested to see. I like Christian Wood. I'm interested to see how like Christian Wood fits into this, and maybe it will improve. But even after switching to small ball last year, Rockets were a top 10 defense, and they were obviously potent offense with James Harden. But that is just the big question: is Harden going to stay? Is he going to be traded? Is John Wall going to be healthy? If John Wall can be healthy, I mean, he's come back from two back-to-back years with injuries. You can't really expect him to be completely his former self, but if he could be somewhat close, I think that would give the Rockets a huge boost and give them a true second scoring option. I just think James Harden's going to be traded, so I have the Rockets finishing 10th in the West.
Now, Houston was one of the teams that was most talked about in the offseason, mostly because James Harden could be on the move, but barring anything that happens right now, my prediction is that James Harden will be traded, but for right now, he is on Houston while we're recording this. What's the date? December 16th, he's on Houston. So I think that the Rockets will do pretty well. They got John Wall. They gave away Westbrook. I think they're both very similar in what they would do in the offense. They got Boogie, and I mean, Boogie isn't what he used to be, but it's not like that's a loss getting Boogie because who knows what he could be after those two injuries. Could come back fine. I love the addition of Christian Wood. I think he is going to be a very, very good young player. He can really rebound, really high motor. He can step out and shoot. If he gets playing time, enough playing time, he's going to be very good this year. Now, if Harden stays, I do think the Rockets take a little bit of a dip. They have a pretty similar roster last year if you look at the starters because they still have Gordon, Tucker. But then, I mean, they still have McLemore. But then they have like Kenyon Martin Jr., they have Sterling Brown, David Nwaba, Bruno Caboclo. Those are all kind of young players that haven't really proved that they belong in the league. Like, yes, they belong, but they haven't proved that they're solid role players. But James Harden is James Harden. They have a new coach. They have a new GM. I see the Rockets making the 7th seed and going to the playoffs with James Harden on the team. Next up, we have the Denver Nuggets. Last year, they finished 3rd in the West at 46-27. They lost to the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. Key additions for the Nuggets are JaMychal Green and RJ Hampton. Key losses, though, they did lose Jeremy Grant and they lost Mason Plumlee. Those were two very quality role players that they had. Jeremy Grant stepping into a bigger role with the Pistons, and who knows where Mason Plumlee will be on the Pistons, maybe a starter. Who knows? Both very good players for the Nuggets. Projected starters for next year, Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, Michael Porter Jr., Paul Millsap, Jokic. Their roster is fairly similar to last year. They have Monty Morris, they have Will Barton, they have Bol Bol, who I'm a huge fan of. PJ Dozier played a lot in the playoffs, and I think RJ Hampton is going to be an impact player from the beginning. They also lost Torrey Craig, which I think will be a little bit of a blow to them, but not enough to where it knocks them down any places in the West. I have them finishing 3rd in the West. I think the Nuggets are a very good team. I think Jokic is definitely going to be in the MVP conversation. I think Michael Porter Jr. is going to keep getting better on offense. I hope his defense got a bit better because in the playoffs, he really got picked on defense, on switches for guards. I think Bol Bol's going to be getting even better. I think JaMychal Green is a good pickup. Monty Morris, great backup point guard. PJ Dozier's developing. The Nuggets are a championship contender in my eyes. And if they're given the right schedule and bracket in the playoffs, I could see them getting back to the Western Conference Finals.
I think the loss of Jeremy Grant for the Nuggets is going to be pretty big. Although they still do have a pretty good rotation. Development of Bol Bol will be interesting. Will Barton and JaMychal Green are going to have a pretty big role on the bench. And RJ Hampton too. He might end up getting quality minutes throughout the season. As they've shown in the past couple of years, they're just going to be another great offensive team. Defensively, they're fine. As Teo said, like Michael Porter Jr. does need to step it up. He's just going to get picked on. And although he's a good offensive scorer, there are times when he probably just won't be able to be on the floor if his defense doesn't improve because he'll just get pick and rolled till they get the matchup that they want, and then they're just going to keep picking on him. Overall, like this team is just going to be another interesting team to watch, another fun team. Bol Bol will be another interesting story, like I've said. And just the ascension of Jamal Murray. Can he? I mean, he went nuclear in the bubble. Is he going to be able to repeat that? Keep doing that? or is he going to kind of settle back down? And same thing with Jokic. I mean, he lost a lot of weight going into the bubble. Now he's going to have that for a full season. The big thing with him in the past has always been just conditioning, and he kind of has to play his way into shape, and he might not have to do that this year. And that might give them a bump depending on rest from the Lakers specifically. It might give them enough wins just over the season with Jokic being in shape the whole season to be able to really give them a really, really good record. As of right now, though, I do see them finishing third in the West. Moving on, we got the Minnesota Timberwolves. Finished 19-45 last year and 14th in the West. So they were one of the 2 Western Conference teams to miss the bubble. They had the first overall pick, and with it, they took Anthony Edwards. They are also able to sign Ricky Rubio and Juan Hernan-Gomez. Right now, the projected starting 5 is Ricky Rubio, D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, Juan Hernan-Gomez, and Karl Anthony Towns. This is just a team that they have the talent there, they have some of the pieces. They may not have quite the depth, especially just depending on what Jerry Culver develops into. It'll be interesting to see whether he can kind of fulfill that role this year or not. Same thing with Malik Beasley, whether kind of just what he does this year. The biggest question I think overall is just kind of how Karl Anthony Towns is going to play this year. I don't think you can blame him for if he has a down year or anything with going through with the 7 losses of family members. I mean, there are more important things than basketball, and I think if he does have a down year, I don't think anybody can really blame him at all or anything. With that being said, he is an amazing player, and he is going to have to just kind of keep leveling up in order to take them places. And the bigger question, kind of why Jimmy Butler got out of there, is just the culture. The locker room hasn't been great according to reports and things like that, and that it might not be the most dedicated team. So it'll be interesting to see kind of the personnel and how it fits together and whether they're really dedicated and can make strides. So given all that, I have the Timberwolves finishing 13th in the West.
I think the Timberwolves are just kind of stuck. I mean, they're in the Western Conference. They have good players, though. They got D'Lo. They have Edwards, Okogie, Towns. You know, they got Rubio back. They have Malik Beasley signed to a new contract. But I just don't see them going anywhere, honestly. I have them finishing 14th in the West, and their record doesn't show their talent because they do have a lot of talented players, but honestly, the West is just too stacked, too competitive, and the Timberwolves are just too young and a little bit too disorganized. Next up, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder. Last year, they finished 5th in the West at 44-28. This was a bit surprising for some NBA fans, but Billy Donovan really did his thing with Chris Paul and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Dennis Schroeder. That 3-guard lineup was lethal in the playoffs. They almost made it past the first round. They lost barely in that Game 7 of the Rockets. Lou Dort got blocked by James Harden. A key addition for the Thunder this offseason was Al Horford, along with the 1,000 draft picks they have for the next 10 years. Their losses were very big, though. They lost 4 incredibly important players to their team last year. Chris Paul, Dennis Schroeder, Steven Adams, Danilo Gallinari. The Thunder hit the reset button. Shea is their guy right now. They have a lot of draft picks. They're really gearing up for the future. Sam Presti knows what he's doing. So I trust the Thunder to be, not very good this year, but for years to come, I think they'll come into their own and have the success that they used to have back in the KD days. But this year, I have the Thunder finishing dead last in the Western Conference.
The Thunder, I think, although their record isn't going to show it this year, they're going to be in a really good spot. They have a super young core in Shea, Diallo, Dortz, and Baisley. And then they got veterans around them to kind of help guide them. George Hill, Horford. I don't think this is going to be a very good year for them. Just a loaded West, and they're just rebuilding. I love Shea's game, though. I think he's going to become an all-star within the next few years. Lou Dortz, he has the potential to be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate always. It'll be interesting to see the development of Diallo and Baisley. Overall, though, there isn't just much going for them other than the young core that will take a couple years to develop probably, and then also the 400 draft picks that they have. I expect them to have a really high draft pick, possibly top 2, maybe even number 1. I do have them finishing 15th in the West this year. Moving on, the Portland Trailblazers, who finished 35-39, which was good for 8th in the West. They did win their play-in game in the bubble, but they lost in the first round to the Lakers. They had some good additions in Enes Kanter, Derrick Jones Jr., and also Robert Covington will be a huge addition. They lost a couple veterans in Trevor Ariza and Mario Hezonja. Right now, starting 5 projection is Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, Carmelo, Robert Covington, and Yusuf Nurkic. I think getting Nurkic back is going to be huge. It's going to just increase their offense even more. I think they got a pretty good rotation. They'll have 8-9 guys I think that they could play, especially with the addition of Covington and DJJ. They'll be able just to give quality minutes. Their defense is going to be something that is going to be a big question mark. They don't really have any good defenders on the team. Covington's fine and Trent Jr., but overall, it's just going to be whether their offense can outpace their defense. And I think for a lot of games it can. Even Enes Kanter, he's a really good offensive player, but defensively he's one of the worst there is in the league probably. Zach Collins was hurt last year too. Nurkic was. And I think getting them back is going to give them a little bit of the boost. So I do have them finishing 7th in the West. Just because getting them back, and Dame's just one of those players just not going to let the Blazers lose.
I think the Blazers will be fairly good again. It is a very stacked Western Conference, but, they always have firepower, especially when you have Damian Lillard on your team. The addition of Robert Covington is wonderful. I think Robert Covington is one of the most valuable non-superstars in the NBA today. He is the prototype for 3-and-D player, the current NBA player that every team wants. But Portland does have their struggles. They barely squeaked into the playoffs last year. They did get a little better, but I just think the West is even more stacked than it was last year. So I have Portland just missing that 8th spot and making the 9th seed in the West. Now let's move on to the Utah Jazz. Last year they finished 6th in the West. They're 44-28. The Jazz are always, pretty good. They're always kind of in the middle of the Western Conference. Key additions, they got Derek Favors back. Key losses, they didn't really lose anybody. Their starting lineup is pretty much same as it was last year. Conley, Mitchell, Bogdanovich, O'Neal, Gobert. They didn't get necessarily any better, any worse. Donovan Mitchell in the bubble showed that he is Utah's franchise guy. Joe Ingles is the GOAT as well. He trash-talked Paul George in the playoffs while sending him home in 5 games. Joe Ingles is the GOAT. I have Utah finishing 6th in the West again. They'll be pretty good again, but their team didn't really change much. They drafted Udoka Azubuike, but who knows how good he'll be. He was a 4-year player at Kansas. I don't think he'll be too much of a difference to the already insanely stacked Western Conference, but they are a force to be reckoned with in the playoffs, and they will be there.
Yeah, with no real roster moves this offseason, I think they're going to have a pretty similar season to last year. They'll be top half in offense and defense. Rudy Gobert, I don't know if he should be Defensive Player of the Year candidate again, but he has the potential to. And Donovan Mitchell, he's one of those, he won't be the MVP candidate, but he might just have the numbers to kind of support it. If he can keep up what he did in the bubble, I think that'll make them a more dangerous team in the playoffs, obviously. During the regular season, though, I think they're going to just be a pretty good team overall. Nothing too crazy, but they're going to be safely into the playoffs. So I do have them in as the 6th seed. Moving on to the Pacific Division, we got first up the Phoenix Suns, who finished 34-39 last year, good for 10th in the West, and just barely missed the play-in game after that crazy 8-0 in the bubble run. They added Jalen Smith, Jay Crowder, Etuan Moore, and then the biggest addition, Chris Paul. They did lose Ricky Rubio and Kelly Oubre and Aaron Baines. Starting 5 right now projected is Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, and DeAndre Ayton. I think the Phoenix Suns are the team that is the outcome of their season is the most in question. They could be a very good team, keep making the strides that they showed in the bubble, or they could kind of just become the same as they were last year, which is an average team but not great. So it's going to be really interesting to see. The addition of Chris Paul is obviously amazing. Gives somebody a really nice backcourt with Chris Paul and Devin Booker, and I expect DeAndre Ayton to make huge strides again. And I think in normal Western Conference years, this would be a solid 7-8 seed. It's just, again, the West is so tough, and the Suns are going to be definitely in contention for the 6, 7, 8 seed, just because of how talented their trio of Paul, Booker, and Ayton's going to be, I would assume. But I do have them just missing the playoffs in the 9th seed. They could be in that play-in game if the NBA has that again. And if they are able to make the playoffs, I could see them being a tough first-round matchup just because they're just going to be a tough team to guard. So, yeah, I do have them coming in at the 9th seed.
I think Phoenix is going to be a great team this year. You see what they did in the bubble. Devin Booker is the man. DeAndre Ayton, he's going to go to another level in his game. Having Chris Paul, one of the best point guards of all time, he is going to elevate everybody on that team, but I think DeAndre Ayton especially will benefit the most by having Chris Paul. He's going to have the ball in his hands whenever he puts his hands up in his spots, whenever he wants it. Devin Booker is going to have his best offensive season yet, I think, and Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, Cameron Johnson, the combination of those 3-and-D type players, wonderful, wonderful players to have on your roster, especially to fill out that rotation. I think Phoenix is in for a very good year, very competitive year, and I'm very high on Phoenix. Seeing what Chris Paul did with that Thunder team last year, I mean, insane to see. I have Phoenix coming in at the 8th seed spot, but I really do think that they could beat up on a lot of teams this year. And I'm not saying they'll beat the 1 seed in the playoffs, but if they do end up seeing the 1 or the 2 seed in the playoffs, man, they're not going to be an easy first round. Next, we'll move on to the Sacramento Kings. Last year, they finished 31-41, which was 12th in the Western Conference. They missed the play-in game, but they do have a lot of young talent. I am a huge De'Aaron Fox fan, huge Buddy Hield fan. I think Marvin Bagley, when healthy, is very good. I think Harrison Barnes, decent wing, good veteran, and Rashawn Holmes is a very underrated big guy. Key additions for the Kings: Tyrese Halliburton, amazing, amazing draft pick. I think he may be still of the draft. Key losses, though, they did lose Bogdanovich and they did lose Bazemore. Bogdanovich might be a big loss for them, but the Kings aren't necessarily a contender. I mean, they're a competitive young team, but they're young. I'm really high on their guards: Halliburton, Hield, Fox. I think that they're going to be a very fun team to watch. I think if those three can coincide, play together, they could be pretty good in a couple years. But given the Kings' recent history, they're super young. I have them coming in at 13th in the West.
I do love the Halliburton pickup. I think he'll be a sleeper rookie of the year, just based on I could see him getting a lot of work as the season progresses. Defensively, this team is just not going to be that good. There's not a lot of great defenders. And offensively, they're just going to be average. I do like the game of Fox and Hield, and then Bagley, just need him to stay healthy to really make a solid judgment on him. That's the biggest issue with him right now, is he just can't stay out healthy for long stretches. So hopefully, he can get that, we can kind of get a more fair judgment on him. I think if everybody kind of made a little bit of a stride, this would be just a team that could actually compete in the West. They have a good bench with Tyrese, Glenn Robinson, Bjelica, and Parker and Whiteside, but there's just not going to be enough in this loaded West to really be able to compete. They'll win their fair share of games, but they're just going to lose a lot just based on the other teams just having a little bit more talent. So I do have the Kings finishing 12th. Next, we got the Golden State Warriors, who finished an abysmal 15-50 last year, 15th in the West, missed the bubble obviously, but they had a pretty good offseason, I would say, except for the Klay Thompson injury. That was definitely not a good news for them. The key additions, though: second pick overall, they did take James Wiseman, which is a very good pickup. Kelly Oubre, Nico Mannion, and Brad Wanamaker. Projected starting 5 right now with the Klay Thompson injury is Steph, Andrew Wiggins, Kelly Oubre, Draymond, and James Wiseman. Assuming Steph stays healthy, he's going to have a good year, I think. And honestly, the Warriors, I think, are going to surprise people. I think there's a lot of people in the NBA that think they're just not going to be that good just because of the Klay Thompson injury. And although that is a huge blow, and I think that kind of removes them from title contention, I think they're still going to have a really good year. They're a pretty deep team. Good starting 5 still with Wiggins, Oubre, and then obviously Curry, Green, Wiseman. And even their bench, they have some veterans with Bazemore, Wanamaker, and even just some good overall players. Pascal's going to be a solid 6th man. Kevon Looney is going to be a solid bench player too. And they just have the pieces. Plus they have Steph Curry. And Steph Curry is one of those players obviously that can just kind of change the game anytime he touches the ball. Last year, obviously the Warriors were not good, and they weren't healthy, and they were playing a bunch of rookies and just kind of players that shouldn't be getting that many minutes. And I think it's just going to be a big bounce back year. I think Steph's going to have a lot to prove. He'll be another MVP candidate, and I think they're just going to have a good season overall. I do have them finishing 4th in the West.
All right, I don't get the Warriors disrespect. I think people have forgotten who Steph Curry is. I've seen a lot of people say that the Warriors won't make the playoffs at all, and I think that's just complete garbage. They have Steph and Curry on their team. That's basically all I need to say about any of this, but they added James Wiseman. You give Curry a mobile, athletic, defensive big man. Come on. You have Draymond Green, possibly the best role player ever. You have Kelly Oubre, great defender, very high energy player. I don't know, maybe I'm just speaking biased, or I'm living in the past with the Warriors because of their recent success, but I think they will finish 5th in the West and make the playoffs. Maybe they won't get past the first round because they're facing the Mavs. Maybe they do upset the Mavs. But overall, all you have to know is they have Steph Curry on their team. So, they will be a force to be reckoned with. Now let's move on to the Los Angeles Clippers. Last year they finished second in the West at 49-23. Key additions, they got Luke Kennard, Serge Ibaka, and Nick Batum. They lost Montrezl Harrell, JaMychal Green, and Landry Shamet. I'd say it's a fair trade-off. Their projected starters are almost the same from last year, but it's Beverly, George, Leonard, Morris, and Ibaka. Ibaka is a huge upgrade at the center position from Montrezl Harrell on the defensive side. But they still have Zubats off the bench, and I think he provides pretty good scoring off the bench. They also have Luke Kennard, Lou Williams, Reggie Jackson, Kai Bowman, Terrence Mann, Batum. They're good up and down. They have veterans, they have young guys, they have shooting, they have defense. I think the Clippers all around are a very good team, and they could be the best team in the NBA this season for the regular season. But personally, I have them coming in second in the West again. I think the Lakers roster might outweigh them a little bit in the regular season. We'll see. But I do think that Kawhi Leonard is going to have another great year. I think that Paul George is going to have a bounce back year. And I just think the Clippers are going to be good again. What happened in the playoffs this year is in the past. And I think they're ready to go back for another playoff run.
So for as much as Paul George just kind of got hated on in the playoffs, which was deserved, I think he'll have a solid bounce back year. I don't think he'll be like a top 10 player or anything like that. But the Clippers overall, they're just going to be a really, really good team. They're super deep. They got star power in Kawhi and even Paul George to an extent. I love the Luke Kennard pickup, just giving them more offense off the bench and then solid rotation just all around. I think that they're going to be the best team in the West. I think they're going to have a good bounce back year. I don't know if they necessarily make it to the finals. I think the Lakers will be a tough out, but for the regular season, I do have them as first in the West. For the last team of our preview, we got the Los Angeles Lakers. They finished 52-19 last year, first in the West, and they were the NBA champions. They had a busy offseason too. They signed Montrezl Harrell, Wesley Matthews, Marcus Gasol, and Dennis Schroeder, and they lost Danny Green, JaVale McGee, Rondo, Avery Bradley, and Dwight Howard. Projected starting five right now. I think this will get tinkered with, but right now it's Dennis Schroeder, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, LeBron, Anthony Davis, and Marcus Gasol. Overall, this team's just up and down. There's just talent across the roster. Even just their bench it's like Caruso, Wesley Matthews, Kuzma, Morris, Montrezl Harrell, even Talen Horton-Tucker. Like, he's their 11th man, and he could see quality minutes. They're going to be top 5 defense again, and they're going to probably be a top 10 offense. There's just not too many flaws about this team. And the flaws they do have, there's only a couple teams that can probably pick them apart. One of their biggest problems, I think, this year, and it's not even a problem, it's just going to be that they're resting players. Obviously, LeBron's up there in age. They're not going to want to play him extensive minutes, I think, and he's just going to have his nights off. Same thing with Davis, just kind of with his injury problems in the past. I could see it with Gasol, too, kind of being more veteran. And so for that reason alone, I think I have them as finishing second in the West for the regular season, though I think they should be the favorites to win the championship again.
Now, everybody has talked about the Lakers this offseason. They won the championship and they made their team even better. I think, though, that their defense is going to take a step back because they did lose Avery Bradley. They lost Rondo, Dwight, and Danny Green. They did get Marcus Gasol back, though, but he's kind of up there in age, so his defense might be in question this year. They got Montrezl Harrell and Dennis Schroeder, two great offensive players, but especially Harrell last playoffs kind of got exposed on the defensive end. So we'll see where their playoff defense is at once playoff time comes. But the Lakers do have a lot of firepower. They have a lot of guys who can go for 20 on any given night. I have the Lakers finishing first in the West. I could see the Clippers being first in the West, but for right now, the Lakers are my 1 seed.
So that's going to wrap it up for the video today. We went through the Western Conference predictions. Make sure you guys like and subscribe and leave a comment down below on what we got wrong, what we got right. I'm really excited for this year. I think it's going to be a really fun, entertaining year. There's just, especially in the West, there's just tons of talent up and down. Even just for the 13-14 seeds, like, they're going to be fun teams to watch. So yeah, be on the lookout. We'll have a video coming out very soon giving just kind of like our first round of playoff specific predictions, playoff matchups and things like that, and who's going to win. And then also our MVP, defensive player, those awards races, who we think is going to win. Our plan for the season is have once a week podcast, just kind of recapping the previous NBA week, talking about news, just kind of talking about whatever are the main storylines for that week. So be on the lookout for that too. Thank you guys for tuning in. And that wraps up the West.